You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Paul Brophy. I am now joined by MEP Kathleen Funchion, who is Sinn Fein MEP for Ireland South. Kathleen, you're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Kathleen, it's been a year since you were elected to Europe. How have you found that transition from national politics to international politics?
Yeah. It's been really interesting. It's been a bit of a roller coaster every year in the sense that obviously for the first few weeks after the count, I was still a TD, and then you'd officially take up your seat in Strasbourg. Then we had a general election back home here, so you have an eye to that. I kind of felt it was important for me to be out and about in the 10 counties during that time, and obviously really conscious that we wanted to hold the seat here for Sinn Fein. Because there was a lot of speculation that we wouldn't be able to achieve that, but we did, and nearly took a second seat too, in fact. So, but it's been really great to kind of get into the role. I'm really enjoying the way the way it's structured. There's a huge amount of work that happens in committees, so it's very different that way. Like we're really only kind of meet in what they call plenary, but what we would call kind of the chamber, like I guess in the equivalent of the Dáil chamber. There's really only one meeting per month. Now it's obviously for a number of days. It's the Strasbourg week, Monday to Thursday, but most of the work is done through committee, and it's actually possible. It's a lot more collaborative, and it's possible to not only work with the other Irish MEPs, but MEPs from all backgrounds, and to maybe get some of your amendments passed as well, which is really, really nice. And it's kind of nice to be able to see that you can put your fingerprints on something, I suppose.
Yeah, and would you say that's the biggest difference you found between being a national politician, a TD, and now being an MEP? It's more kind of collaborative, and it's a different structure in that sense, and it does seem to me, and from what I can see, that in order to get something passed, you have to work with all groups.
Yeah.
Even groups you might have absolutely nothing in common with.
Yeah, definitely. I do think it's a lot more collaborative, and what's actually really nice, because I was a TD for 8 years, so, and during all that time we were in opposition, and you really got used to any amendments that you put forward being voted down just because you were opposition. Whereas in this role in committee, and you can see certain amendments and certain reports being passed, and it's actually really nice because they're being passed because it's the right thing to do, and there's good politics, and it makes sense. And I think that's probably it's probably the key difference. And I really like that difference too, to be honest, because I feel like, we all got involved in politics to try and make changes. I do believe that of most politicians that become involved, they want to see positive change. And particularly being an opposition TD, and when I was on the council, first of all, for 5 years, it was just me, and then there was 3 of us. So, it is lovely to be able to kind of see maybe some of your work getting passed as well. I know there was times at local level and national level where that happened, but this is, it feels maybe a little bit more constructive.
And on the traveling side of things, how are you finding that?
Yeah, I don't mind that. Thankfully, I don't have any issue with flying. It's definitely, you do take a huge amount of flights, so I wouldn't recommend it to anyone that is nervous of flying. But for me, I was traveling up and down to the Dáil Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays. I didn't stay over like the vast majority of TDs. So I was up and down regardless of the times that we started and finished. So in one way, there's a little bit less travel. Now I think I'm in a unique situation to be able to say that. And then we're not too far from Dublin Airport, so it's I'm finding the travel okay.
And the cost of living, Kathleen, it's a massive issue, not just here in Ireland, but across Europe. And you brought up the subject of car insurance, and we've seen some of the highest car insurance rises in the last 5 years, and you've been calling on the European Parliament to do something about that.
Yeah, so there was a time where they looked at the insurance costs in Ireland, and were looking at these sort of like anti-competitive measures and stuff like that. We have our car insurance here is nearly double the cost of what people in other parts of Europe are paying. So I do feel that there should be a role for Europe. I know like there's a fine line, and you're constantly treading this line when you are an MEP between what falls into like what national government is responsible for and what can be done at a European level. But certainly when you look at, we're 27 member states, we're obviously one of those, and our insurance costs are much higher. I do think that there's a role there for Europe to look at it and say, well, why is that the case? And also something that I find that I'm saying continuously in the last year is we need to start learning from other countries. We need to start examining and looking at their practices and seeing what we can learn from it. I think that should be one of the key benefits of 27 member states working together.
And is there anything you've seen that you thought that could actually be good here in Ireland, that could work?
Yeah, like there's lots of examples, kind of in lots of sectors. Certainly, like there's some states, for example, in the housing situation that have really good rent controls, where there's really good protections for tenants and actually good protections for landlords too, around like notice periods and stuff like that. Definitely, there is countries in relation to the insurance thing that seem to be getting it better than what we are. So I do think that that's something we can learn from, and we've written into the relevant commissioner in relation to this to see what we can try and get done. So we're happy to keep you posted on that too.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. And on the cost of living, again, it's price of food when you go into the supermarket, it's going up and up and up. The price of a litre of milk is nearly on par with a litre of petrol. Does Europe have a role in trying to address the cost of living issues that we're seeing here in Ireland at present?
Yeah, so I do think there's a lot more that needs to be done from our national government in relation to cost of living. There is expected surpluses, in relation to our budget figures and tax intakes, and I do think some of that money should be spent. Like there's everyone keeps saying now, and yes, I understand we're in uncertain times, but that's all we keep hearing. I know Trump and the tariffs, and we need to have protections for a rainy day. There's two things to that. First of all, yes, there does need to be money put aside, but you do need to spend some of that money when it is currently raining. And for some people, they're living in a storm in terms of, there's particularly around food. And what worries me around that is it's the one cost where people, like, let's say, for example, you're paying a rent or a mortgage, that's a fixed cost. Same with electricity, same with other bills that you have. The vast majority of people in rural Ireland have to have a car on the road, and you can't get away from, you have to pay for the petrol in your car. Food then is where people start cutting back. And as food prices increase, I think we're going to see far more levels of food poverty. I think we're going to see really worrying levels of that as we come into winter as well, particularly around groups that, can't actually, it's not like you can increase what's coming into the household. Like, for example, if you are on a disability allowance, if you are on a state pension, that you have a fixed income and all of the costs are going up, and a fiver in the budget is not cutting it for people. So I think it is one area. I think there's probably learnings, as I was saying, in lots of areas that we can learn from other countries. But I do think our own government really needs to be doing a lot more in relation to that. And I would see that kind of mainly, I suppose, as firstly their responsibility. I certainly think we can always learn stuff from other countries in Europe, but I do think that on that one, it is kind of their responsibility.
And on the whole subject of, say, the European Union, European Parliament, over 70% of our laws, they originate in Europe. Do you think Europe has to do more as regards communicating that fact to people? Because everything that we look at, when we look at the car that you might be driving, the phone that you might be using, some legislation or something in Europe has probably played a part in that. And that's just two examples. I'm sure there's countless others.
Yeah, I do think there's a bit of a disconnect with people. Like, a lot of people kind of don't understand, what exactly that, I suppose, the role Europe plays in their life. And you're right. I think part of that comes from, it can take so long for legislation to get passed. So if the Commission come out with an idea or a proposal today, we could be into the next term, and we still have 4 years left in this term before you see the reality of that. And I think that's where sometimes the disconnect comes from. I think that's actually probably incumbent on the MEPs, and that's why I think it's really important to try and be out I've kept a clinic here in Kilkenny monthly, but also I'm conscious I have 9 other counties. Obviously, I always had Carlow and Kilkenny as a TD, so we try and go out as much as possible on the Fridays to visit, whether it's groups, whether it's just talking to people. A lot of the queries that we get obviously are maybe around potential funding opportunities, but I think it's really important to go out and about. And the other side of that then is it's important as much as possible to get people over to Europe. So we've done a number of delegations. We did one recently with domestic violence. We had the Amber Women's Refuge and the 1 Million Stars project over. We've had children from all over or young people, I should really say, all over the country through the Children's Ombudsman's office. And then people can actually come over and see exactly the work you're doing. We're hoping to have like a Kilkenny specific delegation after Christmas. So there's I think there's a greater role. Sometimes people say, oh, well, you're an MEP now, you're not dealing with X or Y. But actually, when you're in elected office, in my opinion, it's really important that you stay in touch with the issues, that just the very issues you've been talking about, and cost of living, insurance, things that matter to people. So I think, I know it's busy. I know we're away and everything, but I think we do need to, I think it's our job to do that, because I'm not sure who else is going to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Roisin and I were we were up in Leinster House there very recently, and we were talking to a senator, Fine Gael senator, Niall Kelleher, and we were talking about the whole role of regional assemblies and regional government. Regional assemblies, they actually do distribute a certain amount of funding.
Yeah.
Do you think that more needs to be done there, as to say, one, communicate the work that they do, and two, kind of highlight the types of funding opportunities that may be there through those regional assemblies?
Yeah, so I also think as well that in certain councils, certain local authorities, there is a person that is dedicated to like researching potential European funds and what can be accessed. And I think that should be a role that's funded, even if it wasn't necessarily every single council, but let's say there was somebody for Carlow and Kilkenny, someone for Waterford, someone for kind of Wexford, Wicklow. I do think we need to see more of that, because it's one of the main queries we get. And the vast majority of community organisations, you have a voluntary board of management, people with the best will in the world trying to do something good for their community. They are potentially working, have families, and next thing you get literally reams and reams of paperwork. Like, people talked about the bureaucracy of Europe. I honestly have never seen anything like it, the paperwork and how it operates. So it is overwhelming. And I do think the regional assemblies actually meet quite regularly. And I do think that there's probably, they maybe need to do a little bit more around letting people know exactly what they are doing. And something that has come up recently is the potential for, this hasn't happened, but there's a fear that some funds might start getting funneled in one lump
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? Rather than regionally. And I think it's important that we do keep it regional, because what might be good for Dublin, for example, is not necessarily good for the southeast, is not necessarily good for the west. So I do think we need that. And I'd like to see more of those roles of people in local authorities. And then community groups could make an appointment, could drop in, could find out. And I think it would be really good, because we have a history in this country of leaving money behind as well in terms of European funding, and nobody's going to thank you for that,
And speaking of regions, there was a report done recently on the southeast.
Yeah,
and
that's right.
The average growth in the other regions in Ireland was about 6%, whereas the southeast was at 3%, so it's half the national average.
That's right. Yeah.
The southeast, clearly from that report, is lagging behind.
It is, and I actually, when I saw that was one of my motivations last year to put my name forward for Europe. Was obviously, I'm from Kilkenny and the southeast. I feel really, really strongly about. You're right. We kind of always knew that, and then this report kind of copper fastened it. There's so much more we could be doing. So we've had a few meetings with the port in Waterford. Would like to see that getting developed. They have really, really good plans about offshore wind. There is so much potential for that, because you're obviously around climate change, around different sources of energy. Then it gives us security in our energy sector potentially. and it's small money that they are looking for from government. So we're hoping to have them over sometime in the next number of months to Europe and see what we can potentially help out with, because anything that, like if something gets underway, let's say in Waterford or Kilkenny or Carlow, it has a knock-on effect on the other counties. And it's like anything, if you see, if they start building something next door here in the morning at the local shop, then as people going in to get their lunch, like there is that kind of, knock-on effect. And I think we need to look at that for the Southeast. We have a really great opportunity now with SET2, with finally being a university, and now our roads and our infrastructure, that's, I think, a role for national government in terms of upgrading potentially our rail lines. And then we have Waterford Airport sitting there.
That's what I was going to mention next. Europe obviously would have a role in developing Waterford Airport, because it is something that's badly needed. You have Dublin Airport, which is, choking nearly at full capacity. Yeah, you have Cork Airport as well, but there's other airports in regions that would love an opportunity to to develop the airport and the offerings that they have.
Yeah, no, I think actually I think exactly the same, because we hear all these reports about what they're going to do about the passenger cap, and they're going to be, I think, there's talk of they're obviously potentially in breach of that, and yet we have an airport facility in Waterford. We don't tap into Cork enough, and then Shannon as well. So, like, if we want to have balanced regional development, you need to put the infrastructure in. Roads is one thing, rail, the ports, obviously, but yes, our airports too. And how convenient would it be? And like, air travel is becoming far more of kind of the norm in certain work situations. I mean, I obviously take 2 flights every week.
Yeah,
and
you wouldn't be able to do the job that you do without it.
But you also see so many people on that. It's nearly always what they call the red eye flight, the early morning flight on a Tuesday morning. So many people on that Brussels flight are traveling for work, are traveling for meetings. So, like, and I would say the vast majority of flights we go on are full. So there is opportunities there. It's not like people aren't using the services, and it would be great to see a certain amount of air routes. I'm forgetting the word. I know that there's a proper word for that, but like going from Waterford. And I remember a number of years ago going to London from Waterford, and the convenience of it. So, even if they were to start off with that and give it a chance and see, and I really do feel, that people would use that. And again, it's another potential that we're not tapping into. It's very frustrating, actually, when you think about all these things that, if you had the opportunity to be a minister, if you had the opportunity, to actually say, right, we're going to look at this. I think we've been badly failed by our ministers here as well in the Southeast, it has to be said,
Yeah, and another issue that's kind of caught fire this week is the whole, as you mentioned about funding. Kind of funding is going to be kind of bundled in with into different into one package instead of several. The CAP funding, particularly for agriculture, that is potentially going to be bundled in with other funds. That has impacts as well on community development and rural development. Now, it's only a proposal at the moment, but surely CAP should remain a standalone budget, because if it is bundled in with everything else, that's bad news for Irish farmers and farmers across the European Union as well.
It really is, and there's a very worrying trend coming from Europe around this sort of putting funds in together. Like, I 100% think CAP needs to be protected, needs to be standalone. Like, people need to see increases. There hasn't been increases in relation to inflation over the years, and there needs to be a way of making sure that smaller farmers are benefiting as well from that. But ever since this, announcement by Ursula von der Leyen a number of months ago, how rearm Europe and 800 billion for defence, like, I don't think it's any coincidence that announcement was made. And then there's all this talk about we potentially want to make it easier or combine funds or streamline. To me, that's cuts in another form, another way. I saw that for years when I worked for a trade union. Whenever they spoke about they want to try and make things, kind of easier, like, you always just had to be suspicious. And I think like, I think it's incumbent on any MEP that supports that plan by Ursula von der Leyen to say where they think the funds should come from, because that is a huge amount of money and it has to come from somewhere. And I would have real serious concerns for CAP, but also then for a fund called the Cohesion Fund. And we have gotten, like Solace would have gotten money from that, the workability program, where it helps people with disabilities access employment, they would have gotten funds from it. And, it's potentially small, chipping away at things. But I would be worried about that, definitely.
Yeah, and as I said, it's only a proposal at the moment. But,
yeah.
I was listening to some commentary, and there are a lot of MEPs who are not very happy with it. So there could be a battle on Ursula von der Leyen's hands to get this through, because there seems to be a kind of united front against this.
Yeah, you would hope so. I would certainly hope and think that all the Irish MEPs are on the same page in relation to it. But it's really important then, when people do say that they support a standalone protected budget for CAP, that's how they vote, and that all of their votes around that topic match up with that. Because I used to find this as well in the Dáil. People were great to go to the public meeting and tell the community they supported them. Look at their voting records. That's what I always say to anyone on any topic. It's very easy to access voting records of any of your elected reps, and that's actually, it's an old saying, action speaks louder, but there you go, the proof will be in how people vote.
And another area that you've spoken about in the last number of months is the fisheries, and that's a subject we here on the Irish Political Roundup we've been very focal on. And in the new programme for government, we have seen some. There's a standalone fisheries minister now.
That was welcome, right? Yeah.
There are from speaking to Senator Manas Boyd, who's been a very strong advocate for the fishing industry. When we were talking to Councillor Boyle there very, very recently as well, he said we have a better kind of approach now, but it's about how do we make those changes count in Europe, because you've been very vocal and critical of the actions of Norway's fishermen.
Yeah, I have to say, I find the fishery stuff like nearly kind of emotional, because when we were going around last year with the campaign and talked with, like, I always remember a meeting we had in Wexford around the fisheries, meeting with fishermen, and like there was literally grown men crying in those meetings because they were so concerned about their futures, their families, and like, similar to the agricultural sector, they are providing our food. And I think sometimes people forget that. And
one of the healthiest foods you can eat.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And like, people kind of take it for granted, I think. And I really feel there needs to be far more done in relation to Norway, and how they're just seem to be able to do what they are like in relation to this, which is not right or not fair. But I think as well, there needs to be more funding put in for fisheries, for kind of communities, and for fishermen and their families in situations whereby, whether it's kind of bad weather or whatever, I don't really there's no supports there for them in relation to that. And then around the quotas.
That's the big problem.
Yeah, definitely. And like, there hasn't been, I think there was a kind of tick the box review done a number of years ago on the common fisheries policy, but there actually really hasn't been a proper review done. And I think that needs to happen. And I actually think they need to consult with those that are in the industry. And one really good thing that has happened in the last while as well is there seems to be a united front coming from the Irish fishing industry, and I think that's really important, because as well, that gives them strength to kind of have a united voice. And, you would have, there's always strength in numbers, but I do feel it is something that it needs to be addressed kind of urgently, because it's very difficult to see people who this was their whole life and it's generational, and their sons and daughters have no future in this. And like, I feel like it's one of these situations that in 10 or 15 years time, people will be like, we have to try and revamp the industry. And like, instead of actually trying to save it while we have it,
Yeah, exactly. Because if those skills they go with, they're gone forever. And, Ireland has some of the richest fishing grounds in Europe, and it's a natural resource that we have, and it's something that we should be developing. And you see situations with fishermen, they can only go out to sea for a couple of weeks a year, and then they see French and German boats coming in, and you have to fish all year round. That's very, very unfair.
It is very, very unfair, and to be honest, it's so blatantly unfair and so obviously unfair. And I also think as well, like the sector, has solutions and has done a lot of work in this. So I feel like they should be having given the respect to the commissioner, should be listening to them and talking to them and wanting to see the solutions and see that as a positive thing. Because it's not just, obviously it is in Ireland, but there's other areas as well, other countries, I should say, that have their various problems. And to me, like, it comes back to as well that disconnect and that kind of a lack of actually tying in with groups or with people to understand what the issues are. There's a lot of that, and that's not just at European level. I think we get that in politics a lot, for not probably so much local level, because councillors are kind of so on the ground as such, but there can be a danger certainly in national politics and beyond, let's say, that happens. And I think it's really, really important that we kind of try and tackle that.
And housing is, it's a massive issue, probably a generational issue, and there's been a housing crisis in Ireland for well over a decade, and this European Parliament is the first European Parliament and Commission that has a housing commissioner. I believe the gentleman's name is Dan Jorgensen. What role do you see a housing commissioner as regards kind of in helping Ireland solve the housing crisis that we have once and for all?
Yeah, so like you're right. I feel like in all of my time, and I was elected in 2009 to the council, I feel like we've been talking about how difficult and how bad housing is, and all that's happening is it's getting worse. Like, I kind of can remember a time where, and it's terrible to say this, but you could at least access emergency accommodation. If someone was in a really bad situation, you could think, well, at least we can get them emergency accommodation. Now you're thinking you mightn't even be able to get that for somebody, which is horrible. And there's and that's only one part of it. Then there's people in serious overcrowding, and there's loads of people in really unsuitable, like whether it's mold, whether it's really kind of houses in very bad condition, and people are afraid of their lives to say anything, because then you think, are you going to maybe end up on a notice to quit from a landlord? And just so many people, it's sad to see so many people locked out of the potential of ever owning their own home. Like, for a single person to try and ever think about buying a home, it's nearly an impossibility the way prices are going. So there's a lot that has to be done from national government, and it is a national competency. The remit falls to our housing minister, who is from the southeast, but I think is doing an extremely bad job. If possible, worse than the previous minister. And I think that's saying a lot. But from a European point of view, I think there's maybe 2 to 3 things that could be done. One is, I think there needs to be, and I know there is some regulation and rules, but we certainly need to tackle the issue of the short-term lets. So if you were looking for an Airbnb in Kilkenny, you will find it now, no problem.
No, you will, yeah.
If you're looking for a place to rent, you won't find it. So we need to try and figure out where the disconnect is there, and it needs to be fair to landlords in that too. Like, in terms of, is it that there's a fear about renting, about maybe if a property is left in bad conditions, if someone has had a bad experience, but that needs to be tackled far more. And I do think, because that's an issue in lots of parts, particularly in the parts of Spain that, can see very high tourism in the summer and stuff. That is something I think could definitely be done. And I feel that there's been talk of that. We might see some proposals about that coming out when, I think it's later this year, the housing report is supposed to be published from this committee. And the other thing is the relaxation of fiscal rules. So while we have a surplus and are due to have a bigger surplus in Ireland this year from tax take, and the government would even say it's not an issue of money, it's an issue of, they will claim other things. But in terms of potential investment in our infrastructure, like if there was a relaxation of the fiscal rules, could we see better investment in our water services, in our sewage services, because even if someone gave you the money to build 20 houses, let's say in a certain part of Kilkenny, are the services there? Like, is the water up to standard?
Yes.
We know, like, how
They have the
many
infrastructure to meet it.
yeah, and how many towns and villages do you hear they're on a boil notice, or there's water going to be off or whatever works,
or they can't build houses because there's no
like Castlecomer's had a water issue for
treatment plants.
Yeah, exactly, for a very long time. So that's where I would like to see. And like Ursula von der Leyen, when she spoke about this rearm defence Europe thing, she spoke about the potential of allowing countries to relax fiscal rules for defence spending. Well, why can't we relax fiscal rules for spending in our housing, or I would say spending in other sectors as well, such as the disability sector, our caring industries that we really need to kind of, like, how often do we hear, and I'm sure you hear it as people involved in kind of political programs, the amount of children we see waiting for assessments of needs and then therapy waiting lists. So, like, if we can relax fiscal rules, and that hasn't happened yet, but she has indicated that she wouldn't have an issue with that for defence. If it can be done for defence, it should be done for other more vital projects, I would say, like keeping a roof over people's head, making sure people have access to appointments, which are basic human rights, really,
And the mother and baby homes was something that you were very vocal on when you were a TD, and I believe it's something that you want to take further now as an MEP.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so we're supposed to see a review coming out, I think early next year, of the way the redress scheme was set up. So, as a lot of people will know, it was unbelievably unfair in that anybody that was born into a mother and baby institution that was there for less than 6 months was completely excluded from any financial payment. And the money was very, very small, and particularly for women who were in forced work during their time there. So I would like to kind of coincide the timing of that review with maybe having a group of the mother and baby survivors or advocates out to Europe. Commissioner McGrath last year, to be fair to him, indicated that he would be open to meeting with them. He's the Justice Commissioner, the Irish Commissioner, and there could be other groups that we could meet from various commissions, from commissioners' offices, I should say. So I would like to see if we can do anything around that, particularly kind of maybe the victims directive that comes from Europe, and see, is there a way for us to try and strengthen some of what happened, because as we know, like, it was horrific what happened, but then the state actually just added so much insult to injury.
Absolutely.
With the way, not just the redress, but then the birth and tracing information bill, and people are still finding it difficult to get their own identities and stuff. So I feel like there could be a role there, and certainly I'd like to explore that, and I would like to to be able to have some of the survivors out and let them maybe tell their story and their lived experience.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Kathleen Funchion, MEP, thanks a million for taking the time to chat to us here on the Irish Political Roundup. And I'd like to say thank you to our viewers for taking the time to sit down and watch our interview. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to my colleague, Roisin Ní who's been working as camerawoman today. And Roisin does absolutely Trojan work here on the Irish Political Roundup. So, from me, Paul Brophy, talk to you soon.